That I think the church in the West has done a bad job of engaging with Eastern religions, because what happens is we are in our own little bubble where we interact with secularists, with atheists, with Muslims a lot. But the truth is, when you actually zoom out, you realize that that's all in the same bubble, in the same world.
Right.
That our atheists in the West are Christian atheists, because the God they don't believe in is our God. They don't not believe in Krishna.
Right.
They don't.
Of course.
They don't not believe in Yahweh.
Yeah.
So even the atheists we talk to are still coming to religion from our perspective, what God is, what truth is, what I am, all this kind of stuff. And so Eastern philosophies and religions just have a completely different fundamental axiom, and that's the problem. What makes Sikhism kind of even more complicated is they have this influence from Hinduism and Islam, but those are Islam is a Western religion, and Hinduism is Eastern religion. So here's an interesting thought. So Guru Nanak is talking in the 1400s. This is before the British have taken control of India. So at the time, the religious kind of situation was Hinduism was it. That was the kind of world they were living in. Well, in the Hindu worldview, you have this kind of idea of there's a concept of non-duality versus duality.
Mm-hmm.
And so in Western religions, we have duality, where we believe that I exist and you exist and the external world exists and God exists. And so I am separate from God. I'm separate from you. There's a duality there. Non-dualistic worldviews like Hinduism are saying, actually, no, everything is one. Everything is one. You and I are all components of one. We're just different avatars or different versions or different expressions of the oneness in different ways. And so here's what's interesting is that Sikhi, I would say, it seems to me, Guru Nanak's original message seems to be a non-dualistic message. That the idea is that we are all one. We're all, everything is one. And that's what the Ik Onkar comes down to, that everything is one. So let's break down the word Onkar for a second. Onkar is actually derivative of the word Om. And so, perhaps our viewers, listeners, it's like the stereotypical Eastern guy saying Om, this, right? Well, that's because Om is actually the fundamental sound. It's known as the primordial sound of the universe of existence. And you can break it down. The vowel quality symbolizes certain things, and we're not going to get into that. But fundamentally, in Hinduism, that's what Om is. It's like the fundamental, expressing the fundamental reality. And so by meditating on Om, you're meditating on reality. And Ik Onkar, that's where Onkar is coming from, that kind of perspective. And so if you read a translation of Ik Onkar in English right now, most of the time it will say, there is one God. But that's a totally unhelpful translation, because when they say God and we say God, we don't mean the same thing.
That's right.
So when they say God, they're saying God is, everything is God.
Yes. Yeah.
And also nothing is God in a way, kind of. So this, I would say, is like the technical kind of where Guru Nanak was coming from. But then shortly after, you have the British coming and bringing Christianity, and then you have the Islamic influence from the Mughals. And then today, obviously, you have Sikhs in the diaspora and somewhere like Canada, where they're influenced by Western religions. And so what Sikhs today believe is often very different than that. I think a lot of Sikhs today actually do have a dualistic philosophy, and they view God as kind of a separate God who's out there, who's ethereal, who's unknowable, and who has multiple paths to get there. But fundamentally, they're not seeing it as we're all one in the same way. Or another example is in Sikhism, there's something called the Panch Chor, which is the 5 thieves, which are kind of the 5 vices. And one of them is ego. Well, it seems to me that Guru Nanak, when he's talking about ego, what he means is your conception of self that exists, as in you don't exist. There is no I. But modern Sikhs will often say, well, that just means pridefulness.
Right.
So every single step along the way, you have issues in defining your terms. And so this is where Sikhism is very complicated. It kind of straddles the line between dualistic and non-dualistic in Western and Eastern religions. And it can be difficult to really figure out exactly what's going on. And then you add on to that the fact that it's so new that they're still just figuring out. Like, if you look at Christianity in the first 300 years, if you asked a Christian, is Jesus God? The 2nd century, you're going to get very different answers, because all these heresies are running around and stuff. So you need a bit of time for it to settle and people to figure out what's going on. And so that's why Sikhism is a big challenge to deal with and to interact with a lot of times.
Mm-hmm. And I guess since like, when we talked about Islam, it's like the writings and the laws, it was like very like medieval, they're not going to change it. I guess with Sikhism is because it's newer, are they just adapting and modernizing as they go?
Well, yes.
Like would the writings say everything is one, but modern Sekis are saying no, like there's actually a dual,
Yeah, I see what you're saying. I think it's much more subconscious than that.
Right.
Because like we're talking, so this is why it's like the fundamental axiom that's different in West and East. Our axiom in the West, which is an axiom is like a fundamental truth that can't be proven, is that I exist. Right. Descartes is like, I think, therefore I am. So we have a fundamental axiom. Eastern philosophies actually say, no, I do not exist.
Right.
You can't prove or disprove whether you exist or not to someone else. That is completely fruitless.
Yeah.
So this is the kind of the issue of like, if you grow up with one of those axioms, it's going to be difficult to jump into the other one.
Yeah.
So I think what's happening, a lot of Sikhs are growing up with the Western dualistic axiom, and then they're having a hard time jumping back into the Eastern axiom.
Yeah.
And so that creates difficulties.
Yeah, for sure.